Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
So, should we just admit it? Like, and just tell everybody that these crossover episodes were basically just a clip show now? We play clips and then we say stuff. That's fine. We should lean into it if that's what we are, but I don't know. You're an economist.
Yeah, well, I think it's why we're responding to what the market wants.
No charts and graphs. More internet clip shows. All right. Well, yeah, I don't mind what we're doing at all because today we're going to talk about a podcast that I saw. I think this came out in the middle of April this year, an appearance of Darryl Cooper of the now infamous Martyr Made podcast, showing up on the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Duncan is some kind of comedian I think I'd never heard of, but he's also a good interviewer and has a great show. And I thought this conversation was amazing. I wrote about it on my Substack and shared it. And then independently, Bob, if I'm remembering right, you shared this thing with me and like you wanted to talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's great. It's a heck of a conversation.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't remember who me off to it, but somebody said, "Bob, this is right up your alley. You should check out this." The guy said something like, "Darryl, in this interview, really gets into some of the most challenging questions for theists, or maybe he said Christians. I don't remember." So anyway, that was what it was. And yeah, folks, you are probably saying, "Oh, this is going to be about Gaza or something." I mean, I suppose in some grand sense it is that region of the world, but no, not it's not what you think. This is
In a
very
metaphysical
theological.
sense, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, Cooper is a foreign policy history type expert, if anything, or enthusiast, communicator to the masses. But this show isn't about that at all. And even from my atheistic, myth loving perspective, I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I
So,
was going to
yeah,
say this is as unusual as hearing a gambler and economist talk about Jesus. So, yeah.
who would listen to something like that? All right, let's just dive right in. We got 5 clips. The first one was right off the gate. It sort of sets the table for the conversation, sort of explaining why, like
Oh,
Daryl
I'm
Cooper.
sorry. Can we say one more thing? I didn't know who this guy was either, and partly like for real to give people a heads up in case you got kids in the car or something. I mean, we're gonna bleep anything. At least if you listen to the Bob Murphy show, I don't know how Adam rolls here, but the guy is the Family Hour name of this show like a joke because the guy swears, more than that Family Values guy that was on Part of the Problem one time, and that's saying
Yeah,
something.
I'm glad you said something. We probably will bleep it. I know you will, but yeah, there is cursing. They both end up cursing. And yet it's a very spiritual type, high moral behavior type conversation. I assume it's a joke, but I'm not familiar with the guy's podcast. But anyway, Cooper, has gotten himself infamous lately because when he talks about historical events and context, conflicts, and even like the Jim Jones episodes he did on his podcast, he goes out of his way to try and tell the story from the perspective of everybody involved, including the clear villains.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who are very married to nothing but a black and white, this good, this evil, don't you try and humanize the enemy. That pisses people off. And so this opening clip sort of sets the table for that dynamic.
Mark Twain quote. But who prays for Satan? Who in 18 centuries has had the common humanity to pray for the one sinner that needed it most? Our one fellow and brother who most needed a friend yet had not a single one. The one sinner among us, all who had the highest and clearest right to every Christian's daily and nightly prayers for the plain and unassailable reason that his was the first and greatest need, he being among sinners the supremest. Mark Twain. And that's what I get from many episodes of your podcast. And this is why you are a controversial figure, is because you look into the past, you look into history, and you tell these stories where people we have just taken for granted as bad guys, deserving of the horrors that they encountered because of what they did, where suddenly you humanize them. Suddenly you force an unexpected compassion out of us for things you're not supposed to feel compassion for. And my first question is, when did you become a servant of the Dark Lord?
I think probably it goes back, to when I was a kid, honestly. I grew up in, we were poor growing up. I grew up in the ghettos of West Coast, big cities for the most part, moving around all the time. I went to 35 different public schools
Wow.
over 12 years, moving every few months.
Military family.
Nah, just single mom, and we were living where we could,
Yeah.
from time to time. And we get farmed out to relatives, like if things got a little rough at home at various points. And so growing up in that environment, I knew a lot of people, some of them very close to me, friends, even relatives, great people. They were no less moral than I was, no stupider than I was, just across the board. They're great people.
Yeah.
And a good number of them, they didn't make it out. Like I made it out of that situation. A lot of them ended up in the gutter, or somewhere worse. And I really very early on sort of recognized that it was really largely a matter of luck that I didn't end up like them and they didn't end up like me. The fact that I had a wrestling coach who happened to take an interest at me at this critical juncture where I really could have gone one of two directions. Or another situation where I get into a street fight and really get carried away and the cops show up and they just let me go. And they might not have. My skin tone was a little darker, or if he had gotten up on the wrong side of the bed that morning or whatever. And then my life goes off in a totally different direction.
Right.
So, when I was young in my early 20s in the military, I was still getting in fights with Tijuana police, you know, and having to pay them off so they didn't keep us in a Mexican jail.
Jesus Christ.
And so I think about all those kind of things where it was just purely a matter of luck that my life wasn't completely derailed. Right. And then who knows how I respond to that? Maybe I dose myself or there's all the things that people do to deal with their life not going the way that they hoped or expected. And so just kind of recognizing that but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah.
It really instilled in me, it's still natural to me to judge everybody else. That's natural to all of us. But it really instilled in me a commitment to try not to judge people too harshly who are confronted with circumstances that I know nothing about. That I couldn't imagine being in, having to make choices I couldn't imagine having to make. And really just trying to understand that these are real people who were put in extraordinary situations. And, humans are capable of all kinds. I mean, we can be the Aztecs. We can be, Thomas Aquinas, whatever. We have a wide range of outcomes that humans can arrive at if we are left to our own devices.
Right.
And so there's just, I guess, I try to be humble when I approach other people, including, and maybe especially, I love the way he frames that quote, because I would say, I think that, I posted on Twitter today that people don't like it, or they get annoyed when you don't like what they like, but they really get angry if you don't hate what they hate.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to hate Satan, obviously.
Yes.
It's the epitome of evil, all these kind of things. But I think that it's probably the highest achievement of a Christian's development to be able to recognize and sincerely pray for Satan.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What if not that? What was Jesus doing as he was carrying his cross and saying, "Forgive them; they know not what they do"?
Yeah.
All right, Bob, you big-hearted Christian pacifist, you. What do you got to say about that?
There was a lot there. So I was jotting down notes, and I let me just, I think, go through this list, and then you can say whatever the heck you want to say. You have your own list if you want. So people are going to think I'm saying this to be funny or something. And I can't help but be funny. It just comes naturally to me.
So you are.
Do you ask a bird not to fly? There was a period where I really, I would have these bouts of, and I still do, of just intense, I don't know what you want to call it, spirituality or something, oh wow, I need to be doing more, just whatever, and not out of a sense of duty or something necessarily, but just whatever, feeling no, this is the most important thing, I got to do. And so am I taking this seriously? That kind of introspection. And there was this period where, I really, I'm trying to think of the timeline. It was right when I had my Krugman debate challenge going. And it was like when remember the video went viral, the YouTube about the Bernanke. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
When quantitative easing first happened, and it was like a thing like, so you're telling me that, I can't remember, but it was like, yes, I'm saying that they're printing money because the problem was there's not enough.
One of the first
demand,
computer AI voice thingies.
Yeah. And there is, for people who don't know, the text to speech generation, the person did type in Bernanke, but it just read it as the Bernanke because like that would be a plausible pronunciation of that, and that just went viral. It was like 11 minutes or so. It was like broke all the rules. Like why should that have gone viral? But it did. So anyway, I'm just painting the picture for people that this is the period of my life where I sort of kicked a little bit above just, oh yeah, he's one of those Austrian guys that's at Mises University. We love those guys too. Oh yeah, that guy, he's got the debate challenge with Krugman, right? Like that was kind of, whatever you want, publicity stunt, whatever you want to call it. And so anyway, I remember I actually would, there was a period, I mean, it might've been 3 weeks long. I don't remember, where I would occasionally pray for Bernanke and Paul Krugman, like sincerely, like to try to, I don't remember what I think it, I was like trying to get in their head and like understand why they did what they did. And I was like, Bernanke was like, you're this academic and everything. And then all of a sudden you get put in this position, and they wouldn't have put you there if they didn't know you were going to play ball. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And just trying to imagine, these are the people that killed JFK or whatever. And no one, tells you that explicitly, but you kind of know that's what happened, and I'm going through all this stuff, trying to understand, the position he was in and why he would do what he did. And same thing with Krugman, you went through your whole life and you're just like the smartest guy in the class and blah, blah, blah. And then you really think you can help people. And then, oh my gosh, if these people would just listen to me, and, and you're actually kind of funny in your own way. And anyway, I'm just saying there was periods, and I actually did. It occurred to me that, well, if you're supposed to, bless your enemies and pray, well, Satan is often characterized as the enemy in Christianity. So wouldn't we pray for him? And I even talked to some people about that. And one response, I won't say the person is that, I don't know if the person will want me talking about it, but an interesting response I got was the person said, my point was like, shouldn't I be hoping that Satan or Lucifer repents and turns back to God? Like I never hear anybody talking about that ever in Christianity. Like, and the person said, well, if he did, the Bible would be wrong. And so that'd be kind of weird. Right. And I was like, oh, so two more quick ones here, Adam. So that led me into back when the Star Wars, prequels finally came out, and I was just writing a ton of stuff on the original trilogy and then and I was saying that, I think, part of the message there was, there is this hope for redemption, like, how Anakin turns back and everything. And Luke was, tell your sister you were right and that kind of stuff. But there's no doubt that Palpatine is just flat out evil. And there's not any issue of, oh, well, maybe, if we really gave him a chance, no, that is a bad guy. You get, like, he seduced Anakin and turned him evil. Whereas they make it crystal clear in the prequels, like that guy just derives direct pleasure from causing harm to others and exercising raw power. You know what I mean? So whereas
he's a politician.
I mean, you can say that, but he's not, amongst other things, right? Not all politics. So anyway, I get you're making a joke, but I'm saying, whereas with Anakin, they showed how, it was his love for Padme that was perverted, and his, his ego and everything that was used by Palpatine, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't that anybody tricked Palpatine. It was like, no, he was what he was. So I think that's, in terms of like, pray for your enemies and hope that people repent, and we're all fallen and we're all, but no, Satan is just, he's a bad, malevolent force. There's no steering him back to the good side. And then the last thing I'll say on this is just this general topic. Did you ever read the Lonesome Dove books?
I saw one of the movies, or
Okay.
the movie, but that's it.
Okay, so the books are phenomenal. It's I think it's Larry McMurtry is the author, and what I loved about them when I got into them, amongst other things, is he wouldn't judge as the author, as the narrator or whatever, and with the storytelling. He didn't judge anybody. He would just tell you what happened, and then this person, but he would also get inside the heads of everybody and explain why they were doing what they were doing, even like really evil people. But there was this one, like the head, I think it was like one of the Indian guys that was like an outlaw or something, and he would do stuff. And that was the one character where McMurtry didn't get inside his head. Like he would report as the narrator what the guy did, and it was horrific stuff.
Yeah.
But he never went in that guy's head. And my take on that was McMurtry's like, I know there are people that would do stuff like that. I don't know why they do it. I can't get in there. Like I don't know what the hell would make you think that was the right thing to do. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I only had two really. And the second dovetails with what you just said. But the first is like, what does what Darryl Cooper just said there have? What does it mean when you're considering things like self-defense? Because volatile, dangerous, murderous, psychopathic people exist, and while you're battling them, you don't want to be thinking about whether they could be turned back to the light and away from the dark side of the force or whatever. Sometimes you got to fight. So there's some tension there. But then the other thing I was thinking is that, like Cooper tells the story of Saddam Hussein's kid, Uday.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to prep him for being a psychotic dictator when he grows up, at the age of 3, he takes the kid to watch torture sessions. And so like you just said, Palpatine, he's just been choosing evil from day one. Well, a whole bunch of things that inform what our psyche is happen way before we have anything like the ability to make moral choices, or you can get just wrecked psychologically by just life in your formative years. And I'm very sympathetic to that truth. I mean, as I get older, my joints start to hurt, and I'm starting to really empathize with the old guy on the sidewalk shouting at the kids, "Get off my lawn!" I mean, just being in minor pain makes you cranky, So what else that happens in life can just wreck your psychology and turn into a miserable, mean-spirited bastard? And how much do you think that makes a person unsalvageable or unsympathetic in any way? I think these are interesting questions.
Yeah, my 18-year-old self would have thought, oh, there's certain types of people out there that do these things, like among other things, get divorced. And it would have been inconceivable to me that would have been me. And surprise, right? So amongst all sorts of other things that my 18-year-old self would not believe that I had, and then too, and partly it's because, not that I've had a particularly difficult life compared to many people on this planet, but partly why my trajectory was not what I thought. Is that it's like, you don't understand how much people are going to walk all over you and take advantage of you if you're that naive as I was at 18. Like, no, dude, you gotta toughen up, and you gotta put up defenses, and otherwise you're done. Like, you have no idea, that kind of stuff. And so, and then that makes you somewhat hard, and then you realize like, I was whatever too curt with my kid the other day or something, and you can like think why you were. There was all this stuff but it's not your kid's fault.
Right.
And so anyway, and then it's like, oh, so maybe that's when you're thinking, well, yeah, when I was little, my mom or my dad said this to me. I don't know, like, it still bothers me. And like, well, they had stuff going on too. So anyway,
with wisdom and age, hopefully comes perspective. Speaking of perspective, this next one's pretty great. It's the story of Job.
It's like doing this to the Israelites. You realize like he has no idea what it's like to be afraid. He has no idea what it's like to suffer, to watch his child starve to death, what that's like, he has no idea. And so he goes through, like, you have the whole story. He's just, again, like just brutality after brutality because they whore after other gods or whatever.
Yeah.
Until you get to the book of Job. And the book of Job is so interesting because it starts off by telling you, and Christians will tell you that like no person is without sin or whatever. But I think that's why the book of Job at the very beginning says, yeah, we get that. But this guy, for the purposes of this story, was blameless. He was without sin.
Yeah.
Right? And he loses his family, all his goods, just suffers terribly. Why? Because God kind of got tricked by Satan into like taking this bet. And actually, like, you know, people always put all the responsibility for Satan on that. If you actually read the way the story is structured, God's sitting in his throne room and Satan comes through and God says, hey, get over here. Have you seen my servant Job? You know, he's the best. He's just totally loved. Yeah. He started it.
He's bragging, basically.
Yeah, and he basically challenges the devil in a way to be, you know, by provoking him in that way. And so Job has things happen to him that if you're a human being and you know what it's like to watch your children be killed or just any of these terrible things, I mean, just unbelievable suffering that this man is put through on a whim that means really nothing. It's just a whim in heaven, you know, a bet in heaven. And Job starts complaining. You know, he goes through for 30 chapters as his friends show up and give him all the standard theological reasons for like, well, they must have done. The point is, God is just, which means that if these things happen, there's a reason or whatever. They give him the
What are some of the things happening? Like, we're talking boils, right? That's early phase Job, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't he get boils? I think it's boils, house destroyed, children die.
Yeah.
Literally every bad thing that can happen to you.
All the bad things. Until he's literally sitting in the ashes of his burned down house with a pottery shard scraping like
boils,
the boils,
scratching his boils.
That's what
ash.
He's reduced to. And his wife is the only person in his family left. And she comes up to him, of all people, and says, enough of this, just curse God and die. Right. And so he goes through for 30 chapters and he doesn't curse God, but boy, he lets him have it though. And the whole thrust of Job's lament for 30 chapters, just unbelievable. Like, to me, it's just, it's up there with like the Bhagavad Gita, the Book of John, a few other things. That's one of the pinnacles of like world religious literature, where he basically like challenges him to come down, like almost like in a court of law. He's like, no. You said that if I did this, that, and this, then you would do this, and this.
Yeah.
I did that. What is going on? You need to come down here and you need to explain yourself to me. Yeah. And his friends are like, well, you must have done there was a hidden sin. He's like, no, I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept any of that. I did nothing wrong, and I want him to come down here and tell me why he is doing this to me, right? And that intransigent, like defiance of Job in that, you know, refusing to accept all those standard explanations and, you know, to admit a sin that he did not commit.
Yeah.
I think it finally created that moment of resistance in God where he got kind of thrown back on himself and realized that, like, I mean, because look, I don't really care. Like, you can come up with any sort of abstract theological justification you want. God is the villain in the book of Job. And I think we're supposed to read it that way.
Yeah.
And I think Job is the one who showed him that, look, all of this stuff, these people you've been killing, the things you've been putting them through, you've been so angry because they act like humans. Guess what? Like, this is like, you put us in this world, in a world that is, it's a thresher, you know, it's a threshing floor. I mean, you throw us into this world where everybody we know is going to die.
Yeah.
We're going to watch them die, or they're going to watch us die. Everything we care about, we know is eventually going to go away.
Yeah.
All that. And then we have to like just live in this world and deal with it. You know, I have to live in a world where 6-year-old children get leukemia and die.
Yeah.
You know, and this is the world that we live in.
Well, there's some stuff there.
Yeah. I mean, again, I look at these things mythologically, not the way you do. So I'm just like, that's a powerful story and a powerful way to look at it, but it does imply, like most of the Old Testament does, I think, that God isn't just this unchanging, all-powerful being. You can negotiate with God, and maybe God doesn't understand what humans are actually like until he slaughters a bunch of Israelites and has this incident with Job. Is Cooper correct that basically the Job thing is one of the last incident. I mean, that's like at the end of the Old Testament, right? And then God says what he says and disappears, and then the New Testament shows up. Is that true?
I meant to look that up. So it's like chronologically, or not, that's not the right term. No, in the order of the Old Testament, it's not the last book of the Old Testament, if that's what you're asking. And also, in terms of when it was written down, the book of Job is ancient. And so that confused me that he said that. And I certainly, so folks, in case you're mixed up, it wasn't in the clip that Adam just played there. Like later,
Right.
as they're still talking, Cooper kind of matter-of-factly says, like, yeah, so then once that narrative ends, then it's like Israel's just waiting around, and they don't hear from God for hundreds of years. And then finally, John the Baptist shows up. And so I did mean to look that up because, yeah, I've never heard anyone say that before. The preachers I hear usually treat it as if, like, the last book of the Old Testament, like that's what happens. And then, we're waiting around, and then, radio silence from God for a while.
It is a fascinating perspective. And of course, I think humans over the millennia have learned how to negotiate with reality. I mean, sacrifice is the first clue that we're lowering our time preference and investing towards the future, and learning that we have power to change our culture, our morality, and that impacts the goodness or badness of the future that unfolds. And I look at these old stories, and I can't help but see them from the perspective of a species that is just starting to think about concepts like this. And this is the way they tell stories, and it looks weird, from my perspective, but it also looks really, really interesting and useful. And that's why I watch podcast interviews like this.
Yeah. So I jotted down some things as well on this one. So I just thought it was funny how he said, I mean, if you look at it, like with this book of Job, God's the villain. And that reminded me of when he said, I kind of, when I was screwing around with my friend Jocko there. And
right.
Churchill was the real villain of World War II. So here, I think it actually, like, besides just being ironic, I think it sheds light on what Darryl Cooper's deal is. You know what I mean? Like here, so I don't think he's actually trying to say, maybe we should all become Satanists if you think about it, or we should, go around hating Jewish carpenters. That's not what that's not his point. Like, he's trying to provoke thought and really, okay. And the same thing with the Churchill stuff. I think it's more, instead of us reflexively thinking like, yeah, I mean, firebombing Dresden and, Hiroshima, I mean, what else could we do? Because we're the good guys and they're the, consummate evil bad guys that, well, no, let's think through that a little bit. Right.
There's the way Darryl Cooper views this Job story is really key in understanding the next clip that we're going to play. I don't want to spoil it, but
I do have other things though, real quick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't know. Yeah, all right. Sorry, I didn't know if you were saying so. Let's go. Okay, so I actually think he gave God too much of an out there when he said that the way the story is presented in the book of Job, that God was like tricked by Satan into a lie. No, God wasn't tricked at all. He was fully in charge.
Right.
It's for people at home. So that what happens is, and Cooper is right, that Christians in general say quite adamantly that no human is without sin. It is literally impossible. You Adam and Eve, in a sense, theoretically could have chosen to obey God. They didn't. But then since that point on, clearly everyone born after them has what's called original sin. You're fallen, you're depraved, you can't choose God, he picks you. And, and Jesus did all the work on the cross, and, that's how you're saved, that sort of thing. And so but the book of Job really does say that, no, Job, it's not that he did something wrong, that he was God's faithful servant. And then as they say in the beginning, the devil is in God's presence, and God says, hey, did you see my servant Job? He's pretty good guy down there, huh? Like, he really reveres me. And then Satan says, oh, the only reason, and Job is fabulously wealthy and has like lots of kids and everything. And, is in very good health and vigor and is respected in the community and so forth. And so Satan says to God, oh, the only reason he honors you and, keeps the law or whatever is because you've blessed him so much. If you took that stuff away from him, then, he would curse you. So God says, okay, you can take away everything, but you can't touch him. And so then So it's interesting theologically that God allows it to happen, and it's Satan's idea, sort of, and so God doesn't kill Job's family, or he doesn't like ruin his cattle or whatever, or have his ship sink. Satan does that stuff, but only because God explicitly, and God clearly told him, this is what you're not allowed to do. So anyway, that happens. Job is obviously distraught, but he still doesn't curse God. And then Satan comes back and says, well, it's because you didn't let me touch him. And so God says, okay, do what you want to, but you can't kill him. And so that's when the boils and stuff come on. And what's funny is I don't know if you caught the joke I made it, because I happen to have been reading through the book of Job right now anyway, just, in the morning I read from the Bible and stuff. And there's a part where when he's really just in misery, just sitting there in the ashes, just scratching, his boils, his wife comes out and says, why don't you just curse God and die? And so I made the joke that, notice that the devil knew not to kill his wife. No, we're going to keep her alive to make things even worse. They have her come out and say he did something wrong and to give him bad advice, right? And I was going to leave it at that, but I realized that would be too funny playing in the Battle of the Sexes, because his friends also show up. They're quiet for a while and just sit there, in solidarity with him. But then once they do start talking, they're like, I mean, come on, you must have done something, and God's just. And so anyway, so I didn't just say, he left his wife alive. Also, he didn't kill his good friends, because that was adding to it. That made it even worse. Let's see what else. It reminded me, Adam, the movie Signs. You know that one? Did you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's a great thing where the little kid at one point says to Mel Gibson's character, "I hate you," and Gibson's character knows, like, oh, he's upset about the situation, and then. When the one, it might have been the same kid, I can't remember, getting mixed up. He has asthma or something, and he's having an attack, and they're like in the basement hiding from the alien thingies or whatever. And Gibson's character, who's like a priest who has given up his faith when his wife died, is hugging the kid. He's so furious, and he looks up and he says to God, "I hate you." Mm-hmm. And then later, so that kind of going with what you're saying, that it's the Bible does not teach that you can't tell God you're upset. I mean, Jacob literally wrestles with God. Right, so the Bible doesn't teach that God wants you to just zip your mouth. You're supposed to talk to him and whatever. And anyway, so that's part of it. And then one last thing I'll just say in the book of Job, which is interesting that they do eventually touch on it, in that conversation. But when I was first reading it, when I really was serious about trying to go through the Bible, and you're sitting like, I thought, Job just keeps basically saying, like, to God, like, what's up? Why did you let all this stuff happen to me? What's going on? And I thought God was going to finally come down and talk to him and say, well, you see, this is going to be written down, and you will be remembered for generations. And what I'm trying to, he didn't do any of that. He came down and just said, like, did you make the Leviathan? No, I did. Did you forge the earth? No, I, in other words, like, who are you? And Job's like, yeah, you got a good point there. And then God restores and blesses him, and, restores his riches and whatever. But anyway, I'm just saying, I remember the time I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting God. So there really is just like the book of Job is just saying God is in charge. Like, even the bad stuff that happens, it's because he allows it to. And it's a difficult concept. Last thing I'll say, is G.K. Chesterton's book, The Man Who Was Thursday, really fleshes that idea out. And it didn't click with me until I read that book. For, anybody who cares. I won't say more because I don't want to spoil it, but okay. I said a lot.
Yeah, I really like the shifting. Again, these are they're not metaphors exactly. They're myths to me. They're different ways of looking at the relationship between man and either his maker or just reality in general. And so I find them interesting in that vein. And I like Cooper's different framework on the issue. Like, for me, the story of Adam and Eve choosing to sin and then, getting kicked out of the garden, I view that as something like the moment they became people, because they exercised free will and defied God. And before that, they were something else, some sort of an automaton. Heck, they didn't even
interestingly,
have needles.
Just on that, notice the way it's described is it didn't say like they ate from the poison tree.
Knowledge.
It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? So there was a sense in which they were wiser or something. They knew more about how the world worked after they did that. And it's interesting.
And the stories or the frameworks that Darryl Cooper is rolling out, I don't know if they hold any theological water at all, but they're interesting if you think that God in the Old Testament is just railing against these Israelites who just won't, follow orders. They won't get with the program. They keep doing all these wrong things, worshiping the golden calf and complaining, and it just strikes me as, and he tells a story, Darryl Cooper, of a Marvel character. Did you catch that? Jessica Jones and Killgrave,
I
the
forgot all
Purple
about
Man?
that. That was awesome. Yeah.
It is awesome. So the story, this Killgrave character, he's a villain, originally appeared in the 60s or something, and he's just a regular guy, except he's got the superpower that whatever he says to another person who hears him, that person just can't help but do it. Just whatever it is. Kill your best friend, jump into the lake, put a bullet in your brain. And when he was a small child, the second he demanded anything of his mother verbally, the mother just lost all free will. And so he's going through life as just this playboy who gets anything he wants, walks into the bank, hand me $100,000. That's exactly what happens. And so there's a TV series on Netflix, Marvel Television, where he interacts with Jessica Jones, whose superpower is just that she's strong. And so the two of them meet, and he puts her under his thrall and has her like commit crimes for him and whatnot. And they're having sex, and boyfriend, girlfriend, Bonnie and Clyde. It's great. Then one day, Killgrave, the Purple Man, wants Jessica Jones to just kill some lady, and she doesn't. Just for some reason, she doesn't do it, and it snaps her out of it, and she leaves. And from then on, Killgrave is infatuated with Jessica Jones because, from his perspective, she's the first person he's ever met. Because everyone else doesn't have any free will at all. But the moment he opens his mouth, they do everything he says, and this is the one person who's interesting. And so it's a great drama. Go check it out. But what's interesting is, like, if you believe that God, the creator, can change and be mystified by his creation, it's kind of the situation with God and man. You've created this being that just won't do what you tell him to do. You've given him free will. And it's interesting to think what it would be like for a creator with a creation that mystifies him. And maybe that's why he flies into rages all the time and does this seemingly cruel and awful thing with Job. And then again, I think those basic, again, I don't know if they're theological, but they're interesting perspectives, and they really shed important light on the way Cooper views the crucifixion here in this next clip.
Yeah, just quickly on that stuff you just said, that for me, so I had my kids are spaced apart. So my oldest is 20, and then I got a 5 and a 2-year-old, and the two of them are at the stage right now where they bicker all the time or something. I saw some lady on Twitter recently tweeted that, like, my kids bickering, I can't deal with, that kind of like just exasperated.
Tired.
So I retweeted that, and I said something like, when you have your first child, you understand the New Testament, and when you have your second and third child really close together, you understand the Old Testament, or something like that.
Yeah, it's that vibe. I don't know. I just find it an interesting way to view, again, because I'm thinking of something deeper, like man struggling with the universe, rather than the actual metaphysical story as told in the churches or whatnot. But either way, I think they're fascinating concepts, and I think thinking about them deeply will help you get through your day-to-day life. Or that's what I tell myself anyway. Shall we get to the crucifixion?
Let me just say on that last one, because I was focusing on the joke, but seriously, though, what I mean is, like, let's say that our views, Adam, in terms of libertarianism, whatever, are correct. Do you know, like we really could have just the world full of flying cars and cityscapes that are, whatever, how amazing everything would. There wouldn't be homeless people, or they would just choose to, like, they would be very equipped.
They'd be
with
camping.
Nanobots and whatever, taking care of them or whatever. And yeah, it would just be amazing. Everything, and we don't have that. And why? Ultimately, because we just choose not to, because we can't, we violate a bunch of moral rules, right? Like, in other words, if you and I are right, Adam, and people just didn't steal and various types of just respected property, or just did the things that your parents teach you to do when you're 5 at the playground, we would have the world like that. So
yeah,
if there were a God who created us and loved us and everything, but allowed us the freedom to do wrong things, can you imagine how frustrated and annoying and infuriating that would be. And
Yeah.
I'm saying, I know that with my kids, it's like, I'm trying to get them ready to go to the park and they're fighting me. And so I'm trying to get them to their kid. And I'm just like, we're not going to the dentist. I'm trying to take you to the park. What are you doing? You know, and I just.
Yeah, I feel the frustration. But yeah, from that perspective, you know, we know what the rules are supposed to be. At least we think we do as libertarians or anarchists. And our species just can't get with the program. You know, we're not only fallen, but we're intransigent. You know, we just won't get it together. We've been told, we refuse to obey. Even our own conscience. I mean, we know better. Don't kill, don't steal. We know that. All right, let's get to
It's almost like there's this malevolent being who's
this malevolent being. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get to that too.
What in any of what you've experienced in your entire life has led you to think that deserve has anything to do with this stuff? It just doesn't. This is the world. Does the gazelle deserve to get ripped apart by the lion? You know, does just all of these things that happen where, you know, and I think the core of it really is that in order for Job, for you to even be here in any capacity, asking these questions, like the world has to be structured the way it is. It has to be structured to, you know, to change and evolve over time. And that's how you got here. And that's how this whole thing works. And if it doesn't, then the world is just a dead place that it doesn't move or have any kind of becoming. And so this is how it has to work. But for us, you know, we experience most change as suffering.
Yeah.
And we experience the anticipation of change as like anxiety and fear. And these are like inherent to our condition, you know, of living in the world. And so I think that God says, and this is me speaking as a Christian, obviously, that, you know, everybody thinks of the crucifixion story in terms of like old. I still don't understand how like this became. I mean, I understand the historical development of the idea, but how so many people came to accept a version of the crucifixion story that is essentially just an enlarged version of just pagan sacrifice stories.
Yeah,
where
right.
you have an angry God and he needs to be appeased by sacrifice blood. And yeah, you can keep doing it like with animals and stuff, but you got to do it again and again. But this is the Son of God and he's perfect. And so that's a perfect sacrifice and it finally appeases him.
Yes.
And you think of that and you're like, well, I mean, if God doesn't want to punish us, like why does he have to go through all this elaborate, send his son to die, to, you know, and all those kind of things? And this is another heresy from me, but
heresy too.
Yeah, I think that, you know, like people think of the crucifixion as the means by which man was reconciled to God. I think it was the means by which God was reconciled to man.
Wow.
It was him saying like, look, I kind of get it now. I kind of get what you've been going through this entire time that I didn't get before, you know, because how could I? But I kind of get it now. And I can't change the way the world works. It has to work this way. What I can do is I can come down there and experience it with you.
Yeah.
I can come down there. I can send my son, you know, however you want to think about the Trinity or whatever. But like, you know, I can come down there, send my son down there, and I can suffer and be humiliated and spit on and tortured and killed with the rest of you.
Yeah.
And that by doing that, I mean, the very significance of like, you know, because people will say like, well, yeah, but he was God. You know, Jesus was God. He knew he was going to, after this was all over, he was going to end up in heaven or whatever. It's like, no. They kind of go out of their way to let us know when he says, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? That he kind of like wasn't so sure about that. Like, you know, at the very, very end, like he had reached a point where he felt abandoned by God.
Yep.
And like so he experienced all the things then that we experience in the way that we experience him, like real fear, that night before in the garden, he gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's there like,
I don't know about you, Bob, but I like that reframe an awful lot. It just never made sense to me that Jesus came down and died for our sins. I just couldn't get it. I couldn't make the moral connection. And I don't know if this story is any truer, but it makes a lot more sense to me.
That was fascinating to me. That was why, this whole interview, like at that point, I almost gave up on the interview early on. That, especially because, like I said, the host was just dropping F-bombs, and so I was like, "What the heck is this?" And I was glad I stuck with it though, because when that thing hit, I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
I guess the one part, like he said something about like God didn't understand what it was like to be human until he came. I mean, that's a little bit tricky because if he's omniscient, what does it mean to say he didn't know? But okay, fair enough. Other than that,
But
I thought that was very interesting. And I will confess, the other day, my 5-year-old, I was asking him about, because I go to church and then like he's, they go with the kids, and I was asking him like, what do they teach you? About Jesus? And I was just curious, and somehow it came up that he died, and I was saying, do you know like why he did? And he was like, no, who killed him, and that kind of stuff. And so I was trying to explain it to him, and it was tricky. Like it harkened back to when I was an atheist, and I don't know if you've ever heard me frame it this way, Ed, but it's like, let me get this straight. So Adam and Eve, sin. God's really upset with us. We had this chasm between us, and God says, all right, tell you what, I'll send my son, and if you torture him and murder him, then we're cool. How's that? It doesn't make any sense. What the heck is that? So
this framing.
And I was coming. So what I did with the 5-year-old is I framed it as Jesus conquered death. Like it showed that no, like if the right thing to do is do what God said, do the right thing. And you can say, yeah, but bad things might happen to me, and say, okay, what's your point? You know what I mean? Like, and that Jesus showed, yeah, they might kill me. Okay. And God's can conquer death. So, you know what I mean? Like that, which I think is all true, but it still was kind of dancing around what Cooper's talking about there. That no, the standard way Christians, at least in the United States, I can't speak elsewhere, explain that is to say, yeah, God demanded a sacrifice, somebody had to die, and Jesus says, do it to me, which in any other context would be horrifying to us, to our sense of justice.
It's terrible. This framework is so much better. Yes, you're angry with existence itself because we live in a capricious world where horrible things can happen. And by the telling of this myth, it's me that's doing it to you. But what I'm telling you is no, the world has to work this way, and it has to be dynamic, and you have to have free will, which means that, yes, horrible things are going to happen to you. But trust me, if you act the way I'm telling you to act, in general, it'll all work out. And oh, by the way, just to show you, I'm right here with you. I will come down from heaven in the form of a human. Mm-hmm. I'll call this being my son, but it's me. And I will go through it all in just the manner that I'm telling you that you should do. And yes, even still, I could get murdered for absolutely nothing and die in the most painful way possible. But still, the way I'm advocating for you to act is the right way for you to exist on this world. I don't agree with necessarily all the particulars, but I agree with a lot of them, and I like that myth a lot better. I find it way more persuasive. If they told me that one when I was a little kid, maybe I would have bought in.
Yeah. So to be clear, I think what you just said is all true, but the thing that, and I think even most Christians would have no problem with what you just said and say, oh yeah, that's all that too. But the thing that Cooper said that was heretical was, and I'm not saying that to be like, so therefore I'm going to shut my ears, but what he is more specifically that he was in a sense saying like, yeah, the reason all this bad stuff happens, it's ultimately the buck stops here. Like, we can say, oh, Satan did it, but I allowed it to happen. And it's very Calvinist. That's what was intriguing about this. Like, there's a sense in which I guess another analogy that occurred to me when I was younger is I used to think it was like, oh, God is Yoda and the devil is Palpatine or Vader. And it's like, no, God is George Lucas. Right. And you know what I mean? It's like he's so far above everything. It doesn't even, the devil is just like a character that he created in a sense, or I guess the technical term is they say he created Lucifer, who then chose to fall and then turned into Satan through his own free choice. But in any event, and so that is an interesting thing. So for Cooper, to what he was saying there was there's a sense in his telling and his framing that it's like, oh, the reason Jesus is getting nailed to the cross, like the reason all of the sins of the world are taken upon Jesus is because there is a sense in which is the ultimate supreme authority,
right?
Creator of all,
right?
There's a sense in which this all happened.
This is appropriate. Yeah.
So anyway, I still have to think about that. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it's a very deep mythological structure, and I'm taken by it. And speaking of evil in the world, get a load of the Satan guy.
What's the deal with Lucifer?
It's the real threat to Satan. I mean, like,
So you believe in an actual Satan?
I think he's an egregore, sort of, where, like, do you believe in the military industrial complex? It's like, really, it's just a bunch of bureaucrats and employees at the defense contractors and executives and so forth who all have their own lives. And,
Right.
But no, there's a thing, they don't have the military industrial complex headquarters and they have annual meetings or whatever, but it's a thing and it has a will.
Right.
And a certain amount of agency that we all feel and have to respond to. And so it has reality, even if you can't point to its headquarters. And I think Satan's something like that, like an egregore is like an autonomous spiritual being that, maybe has a fleeting reality if it's something that's created
Santa
by
Claus, Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny.
Yeah, sure.
Hamburglar.
I mean, you have even like William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet, who he was an occultist, and
I love him.
Yeah, he would. His poem. I've been studying his poem of Vision for probably like 20 years. I still don't understand it, but I really love it. But he would has talked about how his little group
That's the Order of the Golden Dawn, right?
Yeah, that they conjured an egregore, a creature, I guess a spiritual being that everybody saw, and it was walking around and so forth. And so if you have for a small group of people to do something like that, it takes a tremendous amount of just focus and discipline and, all of the things that people like that put themselves through in order to be able to come together as a group and make something like that happen. I think that large groups of people who are really motivated by emotion and like just all, very, very powerful, psychological currents flowing through the crowd and the mob, that these things get generated like spontaneously, and so, yeah, I think Satan has reality, whether, I don't believe in like a red guy with a pitchfork, but there's a force out there that has an autonomous sense of agency and goals that are opposed to ours, that you can identify as Satan. I do think that.
I don't know if I believe in Satan or not, but I definitely believe in these satanic egregores he's talking about, and I had to look that word up. A mystical being conjured up in various circumstances. And even though I don't believe in the supernatural, I sure have seen crazy evil behavior happen, and it usually happens when people get mobbed up together in a crowd with their dander up, and it can lead people to doing horrible, horrible things. I mean, that's what the pogroms were. And then he says a quote later we didn't include in that clip. This is from Darryl Cooper. Quote, "The devil moves through us in crowds. God speaks to us individually." End quote. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that.
As much as it's great to have, community and togetherness and all the great things we can do when we get together, we can also go insane at the drop of a hat together. And these egregores are created. And yeah, I'm not talking about anything mystical, folks. You've all seen it. The nasty event that happened at the bar on Friday night. You've all seen stuff like this.
What I was a bit confused in it the first time I watched it and then seeing the clip again, it underscored for me. It seemed like Cooper was bouncing back and forth between two different meanings, and that was kind of the whole issue under examination there. So it was that on the one hand, he said, well, I believe in Satan, the military industrial complex. And then also, so William Butler Yeats and his group conjured up this thing, and it was walking around. The military industrial complex is not a guy in the room walking around. I mean, unless you say Dick Cheney, but you know what I mean? So it's, it seemed like, it's like, so what are you saying? Satan actually is a being with conscious intent, or is it just, people sometimes, crowds behave in certain ways that nobody would individually? Like, those are two separate statements.
They're definitely two different statements, and he said them both, but he is a believer in the supernatural, if I understand correctly. And so I think he believes both of those things, and maybe the one motivates the other.
Yeah. And I thought the host was kind of tripping him up by saying, you're like the Easter Bunny or something. No, not at all like the Easter Bunny. What the hell are you talking about? Are you listening to him? So,
in fact, nothing like
right. And I think Cooper kind of just decided and he kept going on with this point because it reminded me of when the infamous interview with what's his name? Tucker
Tucker
Carlson.
Carlson.
I forget the specifics, but he was riffing, and then Tucker Carlson said like this, and he kind of, and it was like totally contradictory.
Just
it was
let
like,
it go.
No, you
Yeah.
missed the point entirely, and unfortunately, they misled the audience. I think that was some of the confusion about what he was saying is because Tucker misunderstood. Anyway, so yeah, with all this stuff, just my thought. So I do think, like, I believe that God is an actual intelligent, alive being, and so likewise, I think Satan is a being. I don't know if person's the right. Yeah, I guess person is the right word. Interestingly, the stuff about I don't think he's a guy with a pitchfork. Whenever I hope I'm not getting these details wrong, but I listened to R.C. Sproul one time gave a talk or a sermon on that stuff, and he said that where that came from, that imagery, was that like in the medieval church, they had this notion that Satan was very proud, like his pride is one of the like chief sins or whatever. Like that was really like his deal, right? Like he thought he was more important than God, or he's like, no, I'm not going to be subordinate to you. Like that was his chief vice or something, was pride, and so that the way they were going to combat him, like the way to hurt Satan would be to mock him, and so that's where they depicted him as a ridiculous figure with cloven hooves and whatever, and a pitchfork and whatever, to mock him. That is like, no, because actually Satan, if he appeared to you, like he's probably the most handsome man you've ever seen,
Right.
and incredibly charming and right. So no, he's not ridiculous to look at. He'd be the most fascinating. You'd be swooning if you saw him, right? So anyway, that's where that stuff came from. And then Sproul was kind of lamenting, if I'm not misremembering, that because of the church doing that, they believed he was the real thing, and they were trying to give their people tools of self-defense against this thing.
Right.
And then later people pointed at it like, aha, I can't believe our great-grandparents believed in this. Are you kidding me? Yeah, there's some guy in a pitchfork going around like on your shoulder telling you to do naughty thing. Okay, whatever. So anyway.
All right. We've come to our last clip, and I just want to motivate it by, you will see lots and lots of warmongers online talk about how the evil Darryl Cooper and his heretical ideas and just what a jerk face America hater he is.
A jerk face?
Jerk face. I mean, I pretty strong words, but I've heard it out there. And if you think that's true, I would just like you to listen to this little story.
Cool. Was riding the bus to school, and we're the troublemakers in the back, shooting spitballs and paper airplanes and all that, and we're the cool kids. And this was when I was staying with my grandparents up in Montana, and so we're on a bus ride that takes like an hour because they go around and pick everybody up from their farms and ranches and everything else. And so the bus becomes like a social environment of its own, right? When you're on it 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And so one day we stop, and it's a house we've never stopped at before. And this girl who's maybe a year younger than me, I think I was maybe a junior and she was a sophomore, something like that, and her little brother, who is maybe 7 or something, get onto the bus. Nobody knows who these people are.
Yeah.
And so they sit up at the front of the bus. They're obviously very shy. She's sitting with her little sibling. And people are asking in the back, like, who's this? Like, what's her name? Like, what's going on? And you could see, like, just the house we stopped at and their clothes and stuff. This was not a wealthy family, This is on the poorer side, right? Trailer, double wide they lived in and everything. And so they come on. It's a 15-year-old girl and her 6-year-old little brother, right? God, man, this story, like, and people want to know what her name is. And so somebody just gets up, some smartass goes up and says, hey, what's your name? And so she tells him, and he yells back, it's Billy Joe. And somebody shouts out immediately, one of my friends shouts out, Billy Joe, more like Sloppy Joe. And then immediately somebody follows that up with, more like Sloppy Ho.
Mm.
This is her first encounter with this place she's going to spend the next several years. And, she kind of sinks down in her seat. For the entire rest of the time I was at that school with her, her name was Sloppy Ho.
Yeah, right.
And what you saw develop over time was, she became, I pray, I literally have prayed about this a million times. Like literally, I'm not, saying it in a figurative way, that I have prayed that she ended up all right, because you could see it affect the development of this young girl's personality. You're talking about a 15-year-old girl who comes to a new environment and is immediately just, it just completely, that kind of thing can completely derail a person's life, And here's the worst part about it, is I knew at the time, and I've known every day. I never called her that. I was always trying to be nice to her and stuff, but I was part of the friend group that had the in it. And so she was always real standoffish with me. And I talked to I knew some people who were part of the friend group she became a part of, which was kind of the outcast kids, And they would tell me she's like the sweetest person.
Yeah.
She was to everybody else because of course, and the thing that I've always thought about from that day forward, and this is what I told my buddies, the young guy I was talking to. I said that I knew at the time that if I would have been like, dude, shut the up, that everybody would have stopped.
Right.
They wouldn't have kicked my ass. They wouldn't have turned on me or anything like that. Just me interjecting and being like, what are you doing? Would make those people be like, yeah, we're kind of being, hey, sorry, Billy Joe. And it could have changed everything.
Yeah.
But I was a coward. I didn't do it. And there were times, there were other times in other situations where I stood up for a person like that. And there were other times where I didn't. And I told the kid, I said, every single time that I pussed out, I still think about him almost every day. And whatever the consequences that you bear for standing with that person at the time, whatever you're afraid of, whatever, you think your friends are going to turn on you, whatever it doesn't matter. None of that remotely compares to feeling the guilt of that for the next however long in your life, because I felt it for 30 years. And it's not worth it. Stand up for that girl. And whatever happens, you will not regret it. You will regret not doing it. And to me, that's the essence of the Christian message in a lot of ways. Never be a part of that crowd.
Right.
So 2 quick things. We clipped off the beginning, but a friend of his kid came up, a teenager, and asked him for his advice, Cooper, and that's the story he told.
Oh, I thought he was going to say join Hamas.
It's the second thing he told him. But what motivated that story was a Hieronymus Bosch picture. He's famous for doing these horrible, torture-laden, evil, medieval pictures. And the one in question is a crowd of jeering, locals with demonic faces making fun and spitting on Jesus as he carries his cross up the hill to get crucified. And Darryl emphasizes that, who are these people? Well, these are the people that just a couple of weeks ago were waving palm fronds and welcoming in the Messiah who's going to come in and save us from the Romans and all this. And so, this advice that he's giving the son of a good friend of his is don't ever, ever, ever be those jeering, lascivious, maybe that's the wrong word, but just evil jackals. Don't join in the fray. Don't join the mob and do horrible, horrible things that aren't right, when you could stand up and just not only not participate, but just stand up and say no. It's a heck of a good piece of advice. And then you join Hamas.
Hamas. So I struggle with I have a story that's similar, and also that it ties into my view. I don't know if you were reading my blog at the time, but I one time went on a thing where I was trying to explain hell because again in there, it's there's ways of framing it that Jesus is going to save you from hell, and what's hell? Oh, it's where I'm going to burn you for eternity if you don't love me. It's thanks God. You know what I mean? I get it. I understand. And so one way I tried to reconcile is I was trying to come up with what it is. It's got to be difficult, and I thought, all right, what if it's something like when you die, you would have proximity, communion with God, and thus you partake in his omniscience. And then it becomes fully apparent to you how your violations of your own moral principles, right? This isn't God imposing stuff that you, as you went through life, I'm a pretty good guy. I try to do this. I slipped here, I could, but I'm pretty good. I'm not like one of those mass murderer. I'm not one of those bad people out there. No, I'm pretty good. I should go to heaven. And then it is shown to you crystal clear how much pain and suffering, it just multiplies over time. Like it's just little ripples just when you realize the aggregate. And it's not like, oh, but I helped that lady across the street. It's like, no, if you are a serial killer, it's not like, yeah, but how much I donated to charity. It doesn't work like that. And so in the Christian view, it's like, you better have been prepared and gone to church and sing songs every week and just telling yourself, I'm not resting on my own morality, my own accomplishments, my own good works. It's Jesus. And like the only way you can survive that onslaught is if you actually believe that with your whole heart. Because if you think going into it like, well, I'm a little bit nervous, but God's going to show me what I did, and let's like, hey, hit me. Like, no, you're done. And that what hell would just be the knowing what you did and just like, anyway, that agony. So it's okay. So there's that real quick story. And you'll see why this resonated when he was telling me, like, I was like, oh man, it was really getting to me was it like maybe 6th, 7th grade ish. There was this kid in my school. I went to a Catholic school, a very dinky, in the grand scheme of things, very, nobody, the worst thing that happened in terms of physical bullying was my friend who was kind of an outcast. So I was like being nice by being friends with this guy, because a lot of people weren't friends with this guy. And he was kind of like a troublemaker, like he's always, and he just went up and he decked this kid in the face. This kid was like a nerdy kid, like just kind of dorky. And he just decked him in the face for no reason. And like, I was just like, I'd never seen someone get punched before. And I was just like, whoa. And that kid like paused and he was shocked. And then, and he started crying. And my reaction was like, oh dude, don't cry. Come on. Oh my God. You know what I mean? Not, why did my friend just go deck him in the face for no reason? Anyway, I wrote a newsletter that I charged people money for that was the chronicles of this kid, the nerdy kid. And I have to say, it probably sounds worse than it was. Like he kind of went along, like acted as if he thought it was funny, if you get what I'm saying. Okay. So and remember, like the further back you go in my life, the more of a goody two shoes I was. Like I didn't think I was ever going to drive faster than 55 miles per hour. Okay. So I'm just saying, like when I say that, it probably sounds worse than it was, but I did do that. And it was funny. We got called in the principal's office, and she's like, "You can't be writing stuff like this." And the one kid was like, "Yeah, but I didn't collect any money for it, because I did." It was like, anyway. And so okay, so there's that. It was the kind of thing like later, once we were all on Facebook and everything as adults, I messaged that kid and apologized, sort of like that movie scene where, the guy crosses his name off the list, and he was like, oh, I appreciate that and whatever. And yeah, I was real shy back, okay, it was a weird, cool. And then I was somehow talking to someone from, that junior high when I was visiting where I grew up or something. And I heard the story that I think I went to look it up, like to try to get some of the details, and I couldn't quite verify, but the person telling this had no reason to be lying. Like I totally believe that this is what happened. And they said that kid was waiting to turn, he was like, I think he drove a van, and it was a bunch of that same group of kids that like eventually like absorbed him into, he went from being like the outcast to eventually like people kind of tolerated him, being part of the group or something, but he would be the brunt of jokes and whatnot, the low man on the totem pole. And so anyway, he's at the wheel of his van and they're all waiting to turn left into the shopping center, and it's a green light, and the oncoming traffic's coming, and there's a guy on a motorcycle coming, and he's waiting to turn to let this guy go, and they're all like, oh, come on, go. And I won't say his name, but they were like saying the nickname we had for it. Wasn't a derogatory. It was just like a shortening, but telling like, go. And he went to go and misjudged, and he killed the guy.
Oh, no.
And so anyway, I just tell that story like because it occurred to me, we all and probably the reason, if his trajectory had been different, he may have been able to just withstand when those guys are telling, no, you can make it go. He was, no, it's not safe. I'm going to let this guy go. But because he had been, subjected to 15 years of just always them telling him he was wrong and he just deferred to their judgment, and they were wrong.
And he's not willing to risk his precarious position in this group by defying them in any way.
Right. And
oh,
so,
God, that's terrible.
And like, it occurred to me that arguably it could be shown to me that, had you not done that, that guy wouldn't have died. You know what I mean? Like, who would have probably, I wrote, I shouldn't have written that thing, but you get what I'm saying? Like, that's, so anyway, I'm not saying that's all on me or something, but I'm saying to me, that's what could happen when you die. Like in a way to reconcile a lot of this stuff and just be like, you have no idea how much your actions cause suffering to others. You couldn't even calculate all that stuff.
Yeah, you said ripples, and I think that's the way to look at it. I think all of our moral decisions that impact others, and many of them do, even if you think they don't, I think that even the littlest can have a huge impact, as the story you told suggests. And I think you're right. If we all started just acting a little bit better, the world gets geometrically better just by damping down the evil behavior and amplifying the good. And where's my flying car? And what's with this democracy and politicians? And
yeah, I mean, just to elaborate on it, like this thing what I said earlier, like I think most people walking around, if they did stuff that were like, hey, dude, what are you doing that for? A lot of them would probably say, well, you're right. When I was younger, I wouldn't have done that. But you know what happened? 8 years ago, this happened to me. And so that's why now I do such and such because I'm just being smart. And so, but it's a series of those things. You get what I'm saying? So that the reason I just did the thing and now for that person who was, 22 that I just did that to, that's going to be their thing 8 years from now. They're going to say, oh, back when I was 22, some guy did this to me. And that's why I'm like this now. And anyway, you get the idea.
Yep. It all matters, or a lot of it. To change the subject, but did you ever see the Albert Brooks movie Defending Your Life?
Yeah, it was great.
It's very, very funny. It's way too secular, I would imagine, for your average Christian. But, the premise is when you die, you go up to heaven and you have to defend the choices you've made. And if you do it wrong, you get sent back, I think, to do it over. Yeah. And then once you do it right on the trial run, you get to go up to whatever the next level is. And it's a funny movie. Well done.
Yeah. Is it Rip Torn as like his lawyer or something?
Yeah. And I think Buck Henry has almost a cameo. Yeah. It's good. And I think Meryl Streep, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, one of the things I really like about it is when you're being judged, it is from the perspective of your own moral hierarchy. They're not taking something that you may have never heard of because you were born in the deepest jungles or whatever, and applying that moral hierarchy to, it's your own standards, which you said was important to you. And did you have the moral fortitude to follow your own moral code? And I just thought that was an interesting touch for the movie.
Yeah. And I do think it's probably, I can't think of in the Bible where it says it would say that, but there are many Christian apologists who do use like C.S. Lewis, I know, has passages like that. There's something about the door to hell is locked from the inside or something like that. Like his point was,
yeah.
Like there is a sense in which people who are in hell choose to be there.
Yeah,
like
you're
they're
doing
so angry at God, like how dare you?
You're
you
doing it
have
yourself.
Created me, yeah. Kind of thing.
Like with every choice, presumably, or continuing to follow the same patterns or whatever. All right. Well, we've hit the mark, as they say. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the folks?
Just seeing Cooper in that environment, in that or the format, I should say. I think I'm trying to think of how to say this. He tweets some weird stuff, right? And there's some things where it's like you can hear him talk about history, whatever it is, especially if he's talking to Glenn Greenwald or Tom Woods or somebody or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Why is everyone getting mad at this guy? And then he tweets some stuff, and you're like, oh. That's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
And I think partly what's going on is his ultimate view of reality or whatever, I think is so unusual. And it's not that, he's really just this lizard monster guy or something who hates Jews or something, like, you know what I mean? But it is, I think when you see bursts of it and you're trying to put him in a box of, he's this normal guy who's got some revisionist views about history. Like, no, he's got revisionist views about God and things. And so I think, cause I know people who seem like decent people to me say, oh yeah, Darryl Cooper's a great guy. Like, I go out to dinner with him and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, I'm just saying, seeing him in a context like that, like I still trust those people, even though he does have these weird tweets occasionally. Like, what the heck is that?
No,
Where'd
I
that
know
come
what you're
from?
saying. I do find it difficult to reconcile the person I hear on his podcast and in interviews with people I like with the person doing all that tweeting. The only way I can explain it is that Twitter is a cesspool, and sometimes you get dragged down into the mud with all the other awful people who are saying horrible things about you. So maybe that's it, maybe not. Oh, and we played 5 fascinating clips for you folks, but it's a long interview, and there's at least 3 or 4 other amazing stories in there we didn't even talk about that you should really go check out this interview. We'll put the link to it in the video description, and you can also find it in the show notes at hamannature.substack.com, Haman. And yeah, this was great, Bob. Nothing else?
Don't tease kids at school.
Yeah, or at least make it a moment for growth and reflection.
Actually, it's stronger than that. Like, what he said really sums it up is that, like, I think that's the thing is he said, well, I didn't call her that name or something, but the point was he could have just nipped that in the bud. And the other thing he said that was really profound was, and there would have been no bad consequences, right? Like, that's the thing too, with a lot of the stuff, like on, Twitter, like there have been things that I agree with, and if I had been a tenured professor somewhere, I would have retweeted. But because it's like, oh, I'm in the financial sector, like there are things where I don't say things I disagree with ever, but I imagine there are things that I don't retweet that I just choose not to because, well, we're doing a deal with somebody and that person might think it's awkward, and I don't want to just cause a problem for the rest of the team. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm just saying there's lots of stuff like that where I think a lot of people hold back on certain things and probably just think in general about what am I worried about happening? Or, for me, his story there's all kinds of stuff in school, like the idiots, the people I was trying to impress or whatever. And that I would I'm just so disgusted with myself. If I think back to how I conducted myself in high school in terms of the groups that I thought, oh, those are the popular cool kids. And anyway,
it's a little late in the show for confessions, but I'll make this brief.
Mm-hmm.
Much like Darryl Cooper himself, I moved around a bunch in grade school.
I was going to say you used to throw around with police in Mexico.
And junior high and whatnot. Anyway, I moved around a ton, and where I ended up in the social strata was always a little bit hit and miss. And this one place I ended up, I was darn near the bottom and just getting picked on every day. And then
Weren't you 6'3"?
No, I was pretty skinny, and I was tall, but I was real skinny. And when you move around a bunch, you're never going to be an alpha as the new kid.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I ended up near the bottom getting picked on a bunch. And then some poor unfortunate who dressed weird and looked weird and lived in a weird place and was clearly poor and he probably smelled. He came along and he started being the guy that everyone was razzing and cursed me for my sins and weakness. But I turned right around and joined the mob and made fun of that kid too, because hey, it's not me anymore. This is great.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. And I didn't do it for long, but I did it. And I eventually made friends with that kid. But
his name was Chase Oliver.
And I've never made friends with Chase Oliver. No, but it just goes to show, our tribal limbic system or whatever it is strong, and it'll make you do horrible things if you're not forthright.
Yep. I mean, that, of course, is my theory of the most vicious people in high school were the ones that were like at the bottom freshman year, and then they managed to climb up, and they just made sure they kicked the ladder out from behind them.
Yeah, I think something about this hazing is just this cycle of abuse where like, well, I got it good. I'm going to give it to the next people good and hard too. And what is that? The Skull and Bones types say it's bonding and forming close ties, but I'm not buying it. Anyway, Bob, this was awesome. Can't wait to do it next week. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you next time.